Good morning. Good to see you all. Welcome to those of you in the sanctuary, those here in this room, and those online. My name is Bob. I'm one of the pastors here, and we are in a series that we're calling Together. There it is, Together. Talking about some of the things that are most central to us here at the Meeting House. And so if this is one of the first few times you've been here, this is a great time to be here. You'll hear what's really important and why we think it's important to gather together, what we believe is important for the values that we hold. If you're here and this is where you've been for a long time, this is a great time for us to be re-energized and refocused and re-centered on those things that we really believe are vital to our lives and what that looks like. Here's our statement. We find life by following Jesus together. That's why we're existing. That's why we're here. It's the core of our church, that we believe that together we want to walk after Jesus and have him transform us, and that our lives in every single capacity is different because of his love and grace that meet us and challenge us and form us into his image. And last week we started by saying that then there are three ways that we think that happens really well. We call that deepen, gather, and go. Last week we talked about gather, and so if you missed that one, you can pick that up online. But this morning we're gonna be on deepen. Deepen is such an interesting word. It's an interesting thought, trying to put it together. What does it really mean to deepen? Maybe these words will be important. Discipleship, that's a word that we would use around deepen. It would also be apprenticeship. That would be an important one. Apprentice is being formed into the one that we're following after. That's what we believe is happening to us as we follow Jesus. Being a disciple, that's really important to us. And so those terms, you're going to hear them as we go through this service today. But I also want to think about maybe identifying some ways that we think about deepen regularly in our lives that I want to challenge a bit today. So sometimes when we think about deepening in something, we think about gathering more information. Any of you do the Strengths Finder? You know the Strengths Finder? I'm a learner, and I love to learn. And in fact, there's a dopamine hit every time I pick up a book. I don't know what it does to me. If I was a dog, I'd be wagging my tail. That's the kind of thing that happens. And so thinking about deepening, one of the quick things that happens to me is thinking, well, I need to know more about it. And that is absolutely true about being a disciple. We need to know more, but knowing more doesn't mean that we become a disciple necessarily. It could also, going deeper, could mean just getting involved much more, being around whatever it is that we are being discipled and going deeper in, if we're just around it more. So if you came into my office at home, you would see a lot of sports paraphernalia in my office. Over the years, it has just kind of accumulated. So Pittsburgh Steelers, Cleveland Guardians, Cleveland Cavaliers, and most importantly, Ohio State Buckeyes, they fill my office of all this stuff. And if you looked at that long enough, you would say, it seems like his deepening has just been to kind of go deep in having all these experiences with this stuff. And sometimes we think about our spiritual lives in deepening by just being around a lot of religious activity. Because if I'm gonna fill my schedule, if I'm gonna be busy, I might as well be busy doing churchy kind of things or spiritual kind of things, religious kind of things. But you don't have to actually know Jesus to do religious things. Or maybe you say, well, deepening means that I'm doing the things that Jesus said to do. I'm taking care of the poor, and I'm serving the outcasts, and I'm doing a lot of things to care for those that are most in need. And we should be doing that. That is part of what it means to be a disciple. But you can do all those things and still not have any concept of who Jesus is. And so what we want to think about today in the deepen way is that we're asking the question, what does it mean for us to follow after Jesus and actually know Jesus? What does it mean for us to follow after Jesus together and be so transformed by him, but we also know the heartbeat of God. We've experienced the presence of Jesus in our lives. What does it mean to live in that kind of a way? I've been really helped by a guy named John Mark Comer. Actually, I want to share his book with you because if today, if we're going through things, you say, you know what, that is something that I am really interested in my life, I want to just share this book. It's not the only book, but this one's really, really helpful. He has been a voice in our day to help us think about what it looks like to follow after Jesus in really helpful ways. It's called Practicing the Way. But apprentices of Jesus, according to John Mark Comer, they are learning to be with Jesus, to become like him, and to do as he did. Those are the principles. So for all of us today, wherever you're coming from, however you relate to Jesus today, I want you to know today is an invitation to us. It's not a guilt session. It's not heaping on what we should be doing, but it's an invitation, which I believe is an invitation from Jesus, to say, I want you to consider the invitation I'm making to you to walk with me and to be with me, to allow your life to take my shape and be formed by me so that what you do is an overflow of this relationship that I have with you and for you. The best illustration, I was trying all week long, racking my brain, like how do I come up with an illustration that is helpful for us to understand this concept of what we're being invited into today? And I thought, I don't know if there's a better one for me, and you could probably come up with better ones, but for me, when I had little kids at home, they're no longer little, but when they were little, I'm thinking like 5, 6, 7 years old. I would get home from work, and the first thing that they did when I got home was want to play, because that's what you do when you're 5 and 6 and 7, is you play. And what I found is that when I was playing with Legos, or we were throwing the ball in the backyard, or we were just running around the backyard, or doing whatever it is that we were doing, something began to happen that I didn't even know was happening. An intimacy was growing. There was something happening in that relationship that was forming us together in ways that it wasn't even like, I'm gonna play with Tyler, I'm gonna play with Alana so that they talk about the hard things of life or the things they're experiencing when they're 16 or 17 or 18 or 20. It wasn't that, it was more something beautiful was happening because we were in relationship, and it would be this odd thing, right? We're playing together, and Ty would say, Dad, why do groundhogs live in the ground and not in a tree? You go, I don't know. I don't know why they do that. But those are the questions, right? Those are the questions that come out of the randomness of being together and being in a relationship. And this is the type of thing that I think Jesus invites us into, is that whatever the random thing is, whatever the thoughts are, whatever the fears are, whatever the stressors are, there's an interaction that God invites us into through Jesus to talk about and to experience together. And this is what I think is one of the most profound aspects of all of Christianity, is that we worship a God who's come near us. So different than almost every other religion that we might study or look at or hear what their tenets are. This message of Jesus is all about God coming near his creation, seeing it most profoundly in Jesus, who came to live on this earth, to die a death, to be raised again, and now sends his Spirit, his very presence with us, that doesn't leave us as orphans, but comes very, very near us and is with us at all moments of time. This is what I find extremely profound about the faith that we live. Now, where we're going to be today is in John chapter 15, verses 1 through 17. And we're going to read this together. We're going to take a couple breaks as we read it. But this is the 7th place in the Gospel of John where Jesus says, I am. There are 7 statements that Jesus makes a proclamation. He says, I am. I am the shepherd. I am the good shepherd. I am the gate. I am the way, the truth, and the life. 7 times he says this. And you can go through and you can find all these times. But this is the last. It's the 7th time where Jesus says, I am the true vine. And my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. A couple things going on here. One is the very obvious. If any of you are gardeners, any of you have to prune anything or have ever pruned anything, you know what this is talking about. Jesus is given an illustration here to say, pruning is the necessary part of growth that leads to fruit. If you just allow a tomato plant to go crazy, it will produce fruit, tomatoes, but if you do the hard work of pruning it and caring for it and actually chopping some of the growth down so that the growth goes into the fruit, you will produce a more abundant fruit and bigger fruit. And this is kind of that picture. The part of this that probably few of us grapple with is that Jesus is using a metaphor, a picture here, that he is flipping on its head. That he is making a statement to the Jewish people that is completely different than anything that they've known. He is in fact putting himself in a place that is a place of the central message of what God is doing in the world at this time and into the future. And so Jesus changes this image that the former image was that Israel was the vine. That was a common way. And you can go back and look at Psalm 80 or Isaiah 5 or many other places in the Old Testament where it talks about God taking a vine out of Egypt and putting this vine into Israel, the promised land, and this vine then representing the people of God. And it was held in this picture for the Jewish people that they were the vine. They were the ones that God brought out of slavery into freedom, and that in that vine was that people who were God's chosen people. They were the ones that he put effort into and growth into. But Jesus flips this. The current image is Jesus becomes the vine. Now, if you get moved out of a place of what feels like authority or of attention or being centered, that can feel really intimidating and kind of uncomfortable. And Jesus says something has happened in the way God is working in our world, and it is moving from the sense that this vine out of slavery into the promised land is now being kind of taken over. There's a new image to deal with. That Jesus is now the vine, and all people that find life are going to find it in him. This is an image then that we see the Apostle Paul run with. We see through the rest of the Gospels. We see in the book of Acts that the idea that all people are now being brought into this family of God, and they now find their place in the true vine who is Jesus, becomes an on-working illustration for all of us that would understand what it looks like. So that's why when we talk about Jesus around here, what we talk about is that we need to be connected to him and with him. We need to be brought into the family of God because we were all outside of that. We were rejecting it. We were walking in a different direction, but God has invited us in. And so now Jesus is the vine that we all are attached to. Now, there's going to be a word that is highlighted in the next number of verses, so just pay attention to that and how it's used as we read this. You are already clean because of the word I've spoken to you. This is what Jesus says to his disciples. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from you, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. You think there's a word that John wanted us to grapple with. Now, if I wrote this paper for most of my college time, the professor, I would imagine, would say, Bob, I want you to use a thesaurus. I want you to come up with some new words to add spice to this. But in the way that writers wrote in the ancient world, to use the same word over and over and over was to draw attention to it and to focus on it. To say, hey, pay attention here because something is happening that you need to be aware of. And this word remain or abide is meno. That this word is what John uses. It means remain, stay, dwell, practice hospitality. This is the word that would be the equivalent of when you're a kid and you go to grandma and grandpa's, or a kid and you go to a friend's house, and mom and dad show up to pick you up, and you're like, no, go home. We want to stay longer. You know that? Or it's when you go visit someone that you love to visit, and you know that you're only going to be able to be there for a while, but you get to the end of that time together, and it was so rich, it was so full of good conversation that you just want to linger there longer. You know that feeling? This is what John is saying. The Apostle John is saying, this word is that sense, that you don't want to leave. You want to stay connected. That Jesus' words are, this is the relationship I want, that we are so intimately connected that you don't want to be out of that presence. So it causes us to pause and say, wow, if that's the picture, I mean, is that really like that for me in relationship with Jesus? Is that really what it feels like or it looks like? You have to answer this yourself. It's no one else can answer that. But my guess would be, because this is, I'm not projecting my experience on you, but most of the time I would say, I don't know if I have that kind of an intimate relationship where I would say, Jesus, I just don't want to be done praying. I don't want to be done sitting in your presence. I don't want to be done contemplating your scriptures. I don't want to be done thinking about what it will look like the rest of my day, to be prepared for whatever comes, to be thoughtful about how you respond to the world. I would guess that for many of us, if we were most honest, this is a message that the Apostle John would say or record of what Jesus said, and we would say, oh, I would love that. That would be something really important. But if you knew my schedule, if you knew how early I start my day and how late I go to bed, if you knew how many things are weighing on me day after day after day, you would know that I just can't give that kind of time to it. If you knew how much time my kids take out of me and the energy that they take, if you knew how much time school took, if you knew all the reading that I had to do and all the papers I had to write, if you only knew how much life is pulling me into the rat race of what it is to exist, you would know that I might get 30 seconds before a meal. I might get 10 minutes riding to work of quiet. I might get, at the end of the day, when I'm worn out and exhausted, 2 minutes before I fall asleep. If you only knew what my life looked like, you would understand that this idea of being connected in to the vine is just really, really hard. Can we just own that together? Can we just say, yeah, that is our story in some way? It is hard. I hear story after story, people that I talk to that say, I just don't have time for friends. I don't have time for people that I would choose to be with. I don't have time for this or for this or for this. And all of us have a story. All of us have a way. Can you imagine Jesus standing in this space today and saying, brothers and sisters, I want to be with you. I want to connect with you. I want to be yours. I want you to be mine. And I want us to have such a relationship that it lingers, and that even when we're not together, you're thinking about me and you're contemplating my ways, and actually what you do looks like Jesus things, because that's who you are. The apostle continues on. Or Jesus continues on through the apostle's word. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I've loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command: love each other. Jesus ends up with two really important words that he talks about, love and joy. And both of these words come out of a relationship that he projects as this is what happens in my relationship to the Father, Jesus says, is that there is joy. Now, joy in our terminology often means happiness, doesn't it? Joy often gets taken as you're happy, and there are a lot of things that bring us happiness, but joy isn't just happiness. Joy is a deeper word. Joy is a place where you are known, where you are loved. Joy is a place where you are welcome. Joy is an experience where you matter and you find fulfillment and you flourish. Joy is a sense that you are who God has created you to be and he is working in your life. Joy is something deeper than that. Joy exists when life is good, but joy also exists when life isn't. Joy is something that comes from the depths of who we are in relationship to Jesus. There's a ton of work that's going into what people are calling neurotheology, and joy is a really important part of that. And joy is the idea that we are created to live in relationship with Jesus, and that often the way that we find joy is through people that represent Jesus, and they welcome us, and there's a smile. So here's the example. Is joy is a place where you walk into Cheers and everyone knows your name and you're glad to be there and they're glad to have you there. You know, that feeling of joy. Because here's what's amazing is that because joy isn't just based on a really positive experience, joy can be engaged in even when life is really hard, is over the last number of weeks, I've had numerous funerals. And what has been, where I have seen joy show up is that even in the depth of heartache and grief, that when people see loved ones and they welcome them together, even to grieve, there is a joy that sustains them and holds them together and holds them up before the Father that they won't give up and they keep going together. Jesus says, here's what I want you to understand. The joy that you will experience in relationship with me gives you the motivation and the gas to keep going. That's not a great word. And the drive to keep going. You know, every once in a while you say something, and you're like, it sounded really good here, it didn't sound so good here. That was one of those moments. But this drive to just keep going and to know that you are all that God has invited you into relationship, and there's a welling up inside of great dependence and great trust in what God is doing in your life. And he said, and then out of this pours something beautiful. And Jesus uses the illustration. He says, you know, some people would die for their friends. Can you imagine what that's referring to? In just a little bit, Jesus is going to die for his friends. And they're going to see in vivid color what it looks like for Jesus' display of love to be showered upon the cross and forever transform the world of what that looks like. He said, and this is what happens as you come into relationship. So about a year ago, this kind of thing was a challenge. And I said, you know what? We've got to find space within our church, within our community, where we want to experiment thinking about what it is that God might want to do in us abiding, resting, communing with him. I've got a couple friends that are coming on up, Bonnie and Brad. Come on down here, guys. But we started an invitation to something we called practicing formation. And at the beginning of this, as it was being created, come on over here, guys. We said, you know, in order for this to happen, we've got to make a commitment to it. And we need to be willing to say, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to adjust my life to it because being in the presence of Jesus is going to cost us something. And so everyone that sent their kind of request to do this, I sent them back an email, and it said, I'm so glad that you want to be a part of this. I just want to be up front with you with the initial expectation is we're going to go for the next 9 months, and there were some breaks in there, but for 9 months, and if you're going to miss more than 2 of these sessions, maybe it's better to wait for another time because we need to be together, and there needs to be some work that goes on in how we do this. And I was amazed when 23 people said, I'm willing to be a guinea pig for a year. I'm willing to give it a try and see what God might do if we said every Wednesday night, we're just going to set aside some time and we're going to just be present with him. And we're going to be there. And I asked Bonnie and Brad to come and share. They were two of the guinea pigs that were part of this last year, among numbers of you that were also there. But they're also going to be leading another group here in the fall. And if this is something that grabs a hold of you, I wanted you to get some faces to names so that you can get a picture of what's going on. But I wanted them to come and share, and I've asked them two questions I'm going to have them respond to. The first one is kind of what happened as a result of you saying, I'm going to be a guinea pig for this amount of time, and I'm going to listen and be present and trust that God's going to meet me in this as I abide. Give us a sense of what took place. Bonnie, we'll start with you. You have the mic? Yeah, you have the mic. Start with you, and then Brad, if you just follow that up.
Good morning. You know, one of the things that has become very dear to me is just knowing that time with God in the morning is going to be a place where I make my decisions. We all have so many decisions to make, right? And we have so many things to respond to. There's things that irritate us. There's things that frustrate us. There's other things we're excited about, and maybe we don't have the time for them. So many things. But when I come to the Lord and I sit down with him in the quiet, we dialogue about those things. I ask my question, and I sit in the silence, and I notice what comes to mind. I write that down. I ask more questions. More things come to mind. I write those down. I pray. He puts scriptures in my mind. I go look them up. And I start seeing the path that I'm supposed to take. And when I get done with that time and I get up from that time, that space, I have this confidence because my decision not only has been made, but it's been made with God. And I can move forward with that assurance.
For me, mine's a little bit different. I remember when it was first announced that they were going to have this class. I went home and I was talking to my wife about it, and I said, we ought to sign up. We should do that. And a couple days later, she says, hey, I signed up for that class. I'm like, why? Why aren't I? She goes, Brad, she said, it's 9 months. She said, I don't know with your busy schedule whether or not you want to commit to that or not. So I thought about it a little bit, and I said, you know what? I am going to sign up for that class. I'm going to do it. I don't know whether or not I can commit to, like Bob said, I might miss a few Wednesdays, but I'll try. Needless to say, I'm not sure how it happened, but the good Lord managed to make sure that every Wednesday I was clear and free to be at that class. And I'm very proud to say that through that entire time, I had perfect attendance during that time. So that was
he got the certificate, everything.
Got it.
Yeah. The second thing I just want to ask you, because recognizing that this isn't a guilt thing, right? That this isn't Jesus saying you've got to do this, but it's an invitation. But what for the two of you have been some of those things that it's just hard at times? What are the things that get in the way or block that? You say, I just have to be aware that I have to live in grace, knowing that I'm not going to be perfect, but that I'm going to keep showing up, keep showing up, and keep showing up. But what are the challenges that you've experienced in that abiding with Jesus?
For me, I love getting up in the morning and starting on my to-do list, right? We all have these things we want to do. I love being efficient. I love getting a great start. I like feeling like I've accomplished things before most people have had their coffee. And I can actually feel a little frustrated if instead I realize I need to sit and I need to read and I need to pray and I need to journal, because it can go against those motivations to get things done. But I guess I'm putting too much identity in that sense of what I get done and what I can tell people I got done. And so I've flipped it, and I've decided, and I've realized that when you do, that can change. When you start making the time with the Lord the priority and you decide you're going to start your day that way, it becomes the thing that you're looking forward to. And once again, I'm sitting in that space and God can remind me of things. I want you to be humble. I want you to be faithful. I want you to be loving and kind and all those fruits of the Spirit. I want you to abide in me. And I take all the things of life and I filter them through God and those things in His Word. And I come out on the other side so grateful that I'm going to respond with grace and I'm going to respond with faithfulness. I'm going to respond with gratitude. And I become so thankful that I started my time with Him.
And for me, the class that we had, it was just a wonderful group of people. Bonnie, usually every meeting started out with welcome friends. And in the end, we became extremely good friends after that. And we still have those conversations today. For me, one of the things that I go back to many, many years ago was a boss of mine that come to me with a business or an opportunity to move on and grow in the company. And he could see the apprehension in my mind or in my face whenever he said, asked me about taking this job. And he looked at me, sat up at his desk, and he says, Brad, he said, there's things that people can do this from experience, where he said you have people who are willing to learn and move on and grow. And he said, you're one of those people. And I think about that often. And in this class, in the end, what I found for me is I didn't know everything. I learned a lot. But what I do know is my walk with Jesus every day. Now, he walks with me very clearly like my boss did many years ago. And I remember that, and I'll remember that going forward.
Great. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. Can you thank them for me? You all are intimidating to stand in front of, and so they deserve that. So here's the thing. All of us are being formed. We're on a journey of life that you and I are being formed into something. We're going to look like something 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years from now. There was a person in my life a long time ago. He directed a home for senior citizens kind of at the end of life. I remember him speaking at a thing I was at. This was probably 25 years ago. But this has stuck with me so clearly. He said, here's the interesting thing. Is research says that once you pass the age of, and I forget what the age was, 60, 70, something like that, the number of people who ever come to a place of changing and giving their life to Jesus is like 1 in several 10,000. And I listened to that, and I thought, wow, that's so fascinating. And I had a follow-up conversation with him, and I said, I'm really interested to learn more about this. What does this mean? And what he explained to me through that time is he said, just think about it. The longer we go living a certain way, the more crystallized that way is. That makes sense, doesn't it? The longer we live in a certain way, the more crystallized it is. This is what Jesus invites us to. He says, wherever you're at today, whether you're a teenager, whether you're newly married, whether you're in your 20s or 30s or 40s, whatever decade you're in, the invitation that Jesus gives is of abiding, because he's interested in spending time with you. He's interested in forming you. And he's interested in empowering you to live out the message of the hope of Jesus into the world in all the ways that he invites us to do so. But that takes a significant commitment. Jesus will do the work, but we need to show up. That there's a combination of how that occurs. For many of us, this might be a morning that we would think, we say, you know what, I've never actually given a whole lot of thought about the person I'm becoming. I do some religious things, I do some good things, but to think about how my heart is being formed, how my passions are being transformed, how my motivations are being made pure. I don't give a lot of time or thought to that. The invitation that Jesus gave all those years ago when he says, I am, was an invitation for us to consider what it would look like to place ourselves at his feet and just be with him. And so what I want to invite you to, what I want to encourage you to do is just to consider if today that resonates in some way. You think, you know what, I'm being formed, I just don't know what I'm being formed into. Or I'm being formed, but I'm being formed into the news source that I watch. Or I'm being formed, and I'm being formed into the hobbies that I participate in. The last thing I'm actually being formed in is into the person of Jesus. His invitation is for us to say, you know what, through the disciplines, through ways of life, I want to teach you what it looks like to sit at my side. I want to teach you what it looks like to pray unceasingly through the day. I want to teach you of what it looks like to be formed into my image and conformed into my likeness, so that the very way you live would be an overflow of love that transforms and brings hope into the world. And so this is something each of us ask, and if you have questions about that, you say, you know, I don't even know how to think about that. We do have another spiritual formation class beginning, but that's not the complete answer either. There are many, many ways that this happens, but for most of us, we don't know how to do it. And I just want to encourage you that if it could be helpful, I'd love to sit and talk with you, or you can go to any of our prayer corners here in a little while in all our places, and they would be able to direct you and tell you where to go or how maybe you could find more information. But at the end of the day, we aren't trying to just be a church with a ton of activities so we can just feel good about participating in a lot of stuff. At the end of the day, the call of Jesus upon our lives is to be transformed into his image, that our life would be found in him and he would be found in us, so that the way we live would reflect the beauty, the glory of the God who has given us life. So God, this is our prayer today, that through the invitation of what you made, of being formed as the vine, as the one who gives life, Jesus, today we want to pray that you would open our hearts and our minds. Help us even just to confront the way that we're currently moving through life. And if we're moving through it thoughtlessly or without purpose, or certainly without a sense that we're abiding in you, may this be a gentle invitation that we hear, that we contemplate, that we receive, that we would take steps into walking into. And maybe for some of us, it's just that prayer, God, we need to pray that we don't even know how to do this, but we do know what it's like to have a relationship, and we need that and we desire that. God, it is our hope that at TMH we would gather and we would deepen and we would go. And we recognize that we can't do this alone. We need the people around us in this community, and we need the very presence of Jesus to sit with us, to abide with us, and to walk with us. We look forward to what you're going to do in us, through us, and around us as we contemplate and sit in your presence. It's in your holy name that we would pray these things together. Amen.